Pam pam pararam pam pam. This is Philosophy 203, and today we'll be talking about the intelligent design. If you're just tuning in, you are welcome. Stay tuned. Over the centuries, the effort to craft a perfect bulletproof argument for God's existence has taken many forms. There was the ontological argument of Anselm, the four cosmological argument of Aquinas, and they still have their supporters. But many philosophers feel they are simply too flawed, too inconsistent with scientific understanding of the universe to be convincing today. But there was a fifth argument posited by Thomas Aquinas that was popularized 700 years after his time in the late 1700s by the English Christian philosopher William Paley. And this argument for God's existence is still around today. It's known as the teleological argument, aka the intelligent design. To make his case for the existence of God, William Paley gave us what's known as an argument by analogy. This form of argument invites us to consider a particular state of affairs. Let's say it's situation A and situation B. Situation A, about which we already likely to have certain belief, and then likens it to situation B, with which we are less familiar with. The idea is that in the interest of consistency, whatever conclusion we've drawn about situation A, we ought to draw about situation B as well. You can make an argument by analogy about anything, but Paley used it to talk about God in what's known as the watchmaker analogy. He asked us to imagine what we will think of if we found a watch on the ground. Will we imagine that the watch simply appeared randomly, spontaneously on its own, or will we see the complexity of it and notice that its parts seem to come together in a particular way in order to accomplish a goal? If so, wouldn't we think that the watch must have been created by someone on purpose? Well, Paley argued that the teleology demonstrated by a watch would lead us to conclude that it was designed by an intelligent creator with a particular end in mind. And what teleology means is that it is goal-oriented or purposeful. We can simply pick out teleology of man-made objects. I got a mug here. It was designed to hold liquid without leaking. It got a handle put there deliberately in such a way that human fingers could fit in, and its composition is one that will keep the temperature in it without burning my fingers. We wouldn't assume that this mug simply came to be, exhibiting such perfect design for its particular function without someone having created it that way on purpose in the first place. In the same way, the teleology of a cup implies the existence of a cup maker, and that of a watch implies the existence of a watchmaker. Paley saw teleology in the world and assumed from that there is God, which means God exists. He continued this analogy by comparing a watch to a living organism. Look at the complexity of human body. Heart and lungs working together, producing sweat to keep ourselves from overheating, transforming food into energy, or just generally amazing all round. Look at how elements of the natural world operate according to complex laws that sustain beautiful natural harmony. If you accept this analogy, then you agree with Paley that just like the purposefulness of a watch compels us to believe in a watchmaker, the purposefulness of the world compels us to believe in a world maker, God. Hold up, you might think this is a fantastic argument, right? It might even be what motivates your own belief in God. There are a lot of people who say things like sunset and babies show them that there must be a designer, God. But some of you probably ain't buying it, and you know what to do. Arguments are refuted by counter-arguments. So when you want to refute an argument by analogy, you offer a disanalogy. Basically, you demonstrate that situation A and situation B are dissimilar enough that the analogy doesn't work. So to object to Paley, we have to identify a way in which elements of the natural world, like the human bodies, are relevantly dissimilar to watches. When we talk about a watch, an objector might say it obviously had a creator. After all, we can take it apart and see clearly how the gears fit together, how the hands moves and keeps time. But there is so much in the natural world that isn't understandable in the same way. For instance, while God designed our eyes to have blind spots, Paley responded that it doesn't matter whether we can understand how something was created. The point is simply that it was. He might point out that we don't understand the inner workings of our phones, just like how I'm recording this, but we knew it had a creator, and whether or not you can understand how it was created is beside the point. Now, the next objection is that some part of nature seem to be without purpose. A blind spot obviously doesn't have any function. Here, Paley's response was, just because we don't know there is a purpose doesn't mean there isn't one. But this is a problem too, because the whole argument for believing in God is that you should look at the world and see purpose. So if we see something in the world that are working great and really seem to have complexity and a definite use, and others that don't at all, that is a flaw in his argument. What's more, the absence of any obvious purpose in things can lead people to start finding purpose or searching for purpose, effectively making them up along the way. 20th century British philosopher Bertrand Russell finds this purpose-finding tendency funny by pointing out that you could look at a bunny and form a belief that God gave it a fancy white tail so hunters will have something to shoot at. The point is, if we are the ones inventing purpose rather than recognizing ones that are inherently there, then we are the real creators of purpose in the world, not God. Basically, if you believe that God made eyes for seeing, then you also have to believe that He designed rabbit tails so hunters will have something to shoot at, and blind spots as a way for us to get into accidents. So the counter argument here is, we don't just get to pick and choose and say God designed this stuff we want Him to have designed and not the other stuff. No, it doesn't work that way. Rather than searching for this analogy, another way Paley's argument has been countered is with an alternative explanation of situation B. Paley said, bodies are purposeful, and from there concludes that the purpose had to have been put there by an intelligent creator. However, another explanation of how bodies came to have such complexity and functionality they have today is through natural selection and random mutation. So who need a watchmaker when we have evolution by natural selection? Another objection came from 18th century Scottish philosopher David Hume, who pointed out that if we really want to take analogy seriously, we need to conclude that the creator that Paley posited seems to make a lot of mistakes. Like not just blind spots, but how about hurricanes, tsunamis, or why make the human body with certain tissues like the prostate and colon that are incredibly prone to cancer? David Hume pointed out that the world is chock full of stuff that look cruel, ridiculous, impractical, and contrary to life. A flawed world, he said, implies a flawed creator. Another contemporary British philosopher, Richard Swinburne, gives a modern theological argument with the twist of probability. He says that even if there is another possible explanation for the universe, we should go with the explanation that's most likely to be true. And he says that it's simply more probable that God designed the world than that it came true about the pure chance of evolutionary process. Likewise, another class of modern defenses of the teleological argument are collectively known as fine-tuning arguments. These arguments accept the Big Bang and evolution as scientific truths, but they maintain that for the evolution of life to occur, it must likely that God set up the precise condition that is required rather than them coming about by accident. After all, if the earth was just a little closer or further from the sun, if the composition of the atmosphere was slightly different, if the content of our ocean was something other than what it is, life would have never taken root. A lot of people think that these modernized arguments have more going for them than Paley's did. This is partly because this type of teleologists have moved from making assertions about certainty to making claims about probability, which seems easier to get right and to defend. Objectors will counter by saying that the problem with this argument is you can't really make a probability claim when you have a sample set of one. If we had multiple Earths that we could examine, we could see how likely any particular adaptation is or how unique the conditions for life are. Then we will know if it were likely or unlikely for life to happen with or without God. But we can't know that, at least not now, because we can only assess this one world. Here we know that things evolved the way as they did. And thus the counter argument goes, Swinburne and other teleologists recognize that if things were slightly different than they are, then life would maybe wouldn't have evolved or would have evolved very differently. However, that is wholly different from claiming that it is unlikely to have happened in the first place. And with that said, thank you for tuning in. See you all tomorrow.